idea, it was in the first minute. We
Okay, there. Welcome to tonight's session with my co-host Karen E. It's been a while, but it's glad to have her back. We'll be talking about the war in Ukraine and a bit of history. Hi, Karen. How you doing tonight?
I'm doing very well. How are you?
I'm doing well. Doing the Scottish stuff. Like I told you, I got a new killed on order, so it's all good.
Fun
Before we
times.
get into a little history about this, what bothers you most about this dirty little war?
I would say, the way that Putin is definitely targeting civilians when you see hospitals and schools and churches and things that are not valid targets according to the Geneva Conventions being targeted, while he's also telling people that they're not targeting that. I mean, you hit it once or twice, that's a mistake, that's understandable. You hit it repeatedly in all different cities, that you're targeting
Mhm.
civilians.
Yeah, the humanitarian issue is the craziest part of this. And there are 2 million people now displaced from the country, and all of them. And they said there's over 400 civilians at least have been killed.
Right.
And I'm
I
sure the number is much higher than that in
and
reality.
I heard I read a story yesterday about a girl that with two of her friends, they were, sneaking around to take food to people that were trapped into animals and shelters to make sure they didn't starve, and they were targeted just like they were soldiers when it's obvious that they're not. They're getting food to people that they never should be targeted.
Yeah. Well, I'm going to get a little blunt, which I never do, particularly around my daughter. But I'm going to do some quotes on this. I read today that instead of road signs around Odessa, they have the sign for straight ahead that says "fuck you." They
Yep,
have one that says "left," "fuck you," and they have one that says "right." It goes, "Go fucking home." Excuse my
exactly.
language, listeners out there, but every now and then, we got to get the point across that they're really fighting back on there.
They have
Nobody, yeah, go
I
ahead.
would say they have fortified multiple positions, defensive positions and offensive positions around Kiev, and it's really impressive because I don't think anybody would have said, "Oh yeah, Ukraine's an offensive powerhouse or even a defensive powerhouse in a military sense." But what they've been able to do is impressive.
Yeah, and they expected 3 to 4 days they'd be in Kiev, and it didn't happen that way at all. And they're still keeping them out of the city as much as they can be. And Zelensky, boy, I'm impressed with that man. Zelensky actually went into his office and did a cast yesterday to
I,
broadcast to people, and
I
that's kind
saw
of
that.
impressive. He wasn't in the bunker or anything else. He was right out there doing what he's going to do. One of the interesting things, and you as a retired Air Force must find interesting about this, is they have not been able to have air superiority.
Yeah, and that's actually something that in a way surprises me, but in a way that it doesn't. They have very well engineered aircraft in avionics, and they have a lot of capability, but training wise, they are not trained to the same level our pilots are. And so while they're still good, it is shocking to me though that they're still getting a lot of aircraft shot down. I don't think it's been confirmed yet, but I heard that 2 bombers were shot down yesterday.
That's it's amazing. Um, I think that that if they had not taken Crimea, so if Putin hadn't taken Crimea in 2014, I'm wondering if Ukraine would have been as uh, good militarily as they've turned out to be. Because it just kind of set them up, and they've had training from all over, and even the people help train them, and I'm impressed with what they're doing.
I also have heard that, I'm sure you've read it too, that Zelensky has I forget what it's called, the International Legion that he's making, that they have, like, I've seen a few different numbers up to 16,000 foreign fighters, and I've read articles about special forces guys from the US that were no longer in the military that are headed over. These
Yeah,
are
I
the
mean,
people these are the people that aren't scared of anything.
yeah, and there are people that have to sit in the sidelines and seeing what Russia did in Syria
Mhm.
and in other places, and they're just are not going to. They think this is the payback time, and it
Right.
really is.
And
You
it's
know,
it's it's funny because, I read that I forget who it was. It was a US politician that basically said that they felt that Putin didn't respect us because of the sloppy withdrawal from Afghanistan, but actually, I think a lot of these people are motivated. Anybody that's been in Afghanistan is motivated to go back and work with a country that cares about its democracy, which is what we always wanted the Afghanis to do. And here's a country that's standing up for all democracy in the world, and people want to be a part of that.
yeah, if it just briefly on Afghanistan, Afghanistan had never been conquered by anybody. The British tried it going through the Khyber Pass from India and Pakistan area. The Russians tried it and lost miserably because they have an insurgency. They took over, but the insurgency was just too powerful, and they had to go like we did from Vietnam, particularly. And then we tried it, and we should have known better after the Russian experience.
But it's
But
so much more than just, the terrain is one of the things that they blame. And it's so much more than that, though. Like, you can't take a nation that doesn't have national pride. They have tribe pride and family pride,
mhm,
and you can't convince them that they should all be flying Afghani flags. You can't convince them that democracy is where it's at, especially when the elections that they did have were rigged. And
yeah,
that was something that a lot of people had a problem with, a lot of Afghani citizens. It's dangerous to vote, first of all. And then second of all, the person that should have won at least the first time, if not the first 10 times, was not the person that actually won, and
yeah.
people were tired of that.
And you're right. That takes us back to Afghanistan, where you had a really free election, and a man went out there to end the corruption that was within his government. And you also had the experiences with the former president and everything. I think the second amazing thing with this is how President Biden and the Western leaders were able to come together after that 4 years of trying to dismantle NATO and everything that went with it. And they came together to unite against the common enemy once again. I
I
think,
think that's I think it's fear. Like,
yeah,
in especially European countries, this is not unfamiliar. It's been a long time, but it's not unfamiliar to them.
yeah, and I'll grant that Russia has a different setup than they did in the Cold War because now those countries that they had such control of are part of NATO, and that's
Mhm.
probably frustrating to them. But you can't go back and have an empire when you've done it. I mean, they had the problem before with all those kinds of things.
And
As
one
we
of the
look at,
things, like,
yeah,
you can't trust Putin. If his
yeah.
mouth is moving, he's lying. Like,
Well, the problem when you have somebody who had been like secret police type person taking over, um, you can do that. You can be like that. Stalin took over because he was secretary of the Communist Party. Everybody thought Trotsky with the military would do it. And that was one of the issues with the military. It's a very interesting situation with the Russian military. And, we get to that in a couple of minutes. But let's go back a little bit to what I said in the beginning that we need to talk a little bit about the history, particularly as Putin seems to be using history as his reasoning for doing this. Because, people out here who listen to me know I'm a historian. Let's go back a bit. Putin claimed that Russia begot the Ukraine, using a biblical term. History tells us it was the other way around. Way back, the first capital of the area was Kiev. The area is known as Kievan Rus. That's where the Russian came out of it. Here we found such a large territory controlled by this group, and some of it is even what is now Finland. And of course, we know one of the most famous czars who ruled from Kiev was Ivan. Now, we know him in history, many people, but as Ivan the Terrible. But if you look at translating his name, it could also be Ivan the Awesome. They even used this thing in the second uh, one of the Night in the Museum at the Smithsonian. He actually talked about being Ivan the Awesome, not Ivan the Terrible, in that cartoonish way. So it's really kind of uh, Moscow is a newcomer, really, as the capital of Russia and the center of Russia. Before it was much closer to the European mainland instead of close to the Urals as Moscow is. So this situation is so sad with so many people being sent out of their homes, so much of a military being able to continue when it all looks like it could be lost so quickly, and to see the Russian army being so clumsy, really.
Yeah. And I think that some of that, it kind of, to relate it to sports, when you underestimate your opponent, you don't you don't go out there thinking of it as, you're not thinking of it like the playoffs. You're thinking it's like a scrimmage against your, what whoever. You're not thinking about this is actually somebody that's as capable with us. And I think that for too long, Russia has relied in their minds on the mass that they have, just the sheer amount of people and machinery, and not taking into account that maybe their tactics don't work.
And on top of that, we tend to forget one thing that's far different between almost all the militaries of the European countries as well as the United States and Canada. They don't rely for the majority of their people on conscripts. These are people who actually volunteer. So much
Yeah,
of Russia is conscript. And these guys
right.
go in, and they were saying they were supposed to have 4 months of training before they went to Ukraine, and they were saying a lot of these came in with 2 months of training. Now, before you became an officer, you went through basic training. In 2 months, would you have been prepared to fight?
No. But actually, that they when I went through, they were working on making us more agile to deploy, and that we did do our gas mask training and basic training, and we did do some of those skills that you traditionally were getting later on in your Air Force career, not in basic training. It was something you would do at your first duty station. But even with that, I still wouldn't have felt confident to go to war. I mean, what about Army infantry training in the US? How long is that?
Yeah, I mean the basic training now is like 2 months, and you're not considered trained till you go to your advanced courses and beyond. So they don't really figure you're ready to really get into the until at least a year before you're really there. But you also have a more egalitarian system in the United States, where that it's not just by time in office that gets to be a corporal, a sergeant, so on, as it is in Russia. It's not based on merit.
Yeah,
Where in the United States, I mean, if you're an enlisted person, you can basically keep on going to E3, E4 without a problem. But to be E5 and beyond, and particularly if you get in the higher levels of it, you have to be extremely talented and knowledgeable, not only in your field, but in the entire Air Force or the Army or the Marines or the Navy. You really have to know your stuff, and that doesn't happen. You can have numbers, but the numbers are not what it may seem to be. Then it does have a problem, and I think
and
morale is a big issue for them.
I know it is, and I think that, like, one thing that the Ukrainians are doing really well is they're almost half fighting like an insurgency. I just read a little while ago that, they had to turn people away that were volunteering to join their military because they had too many people volunteering. The people that they weren't able to take in have started making Molotov cocktails to give away to whoever can throw them, or they're going and throwing them at Russians, like, it's no fear, even if you're not in the military, even if you don't have a gun. And that, like, the citizens like that, it makes it almost like an insurgency. And that is hard for the Russians, especially because you know that the infantry is not going to be trained in tactics or any sort of advanced level wargaming or anything like that. They're just drones with a gun.
Oh yeah, it's just amazing the situation of how it's become, and they're losing. I mean, they're losing a lot of tanks. They're losing a lot of aircraft in there. People, they're just abandoning it, and they've had some wholesale surrenders. I read early on that because
Yeah.
they know that they're not going to get it. They're not going to get the supplies that they need and everything else. And they just every time you give the Ukrainians something, they seem to be able to use it as more effectively than you'd even expect. And you know what? It really gets me. They actually, I read the other day that a brewery, instead of doing that, is using those bottles to make Molotov cocktails to give out to the citizens.
Yeah, it's like everybody's in on this. And you know that there's people that are in tunnels and subway things and underground hiding, babies and older people and moms that don't want to leave their kids or that they're too scared to evacuate. Because every time I also don't trust Putin if he says there'll be a ceasefire and we'll let you evacuate. Yeah, right. Like I don't think he would do that. It's there's something if he agrees to that, there's something else he's planning to do.
Yeah,
That's just how he is.
yeah, he's totally untrustworthy, which is a sad thing because we went through 4 years with former person said that he was completely trustworthy. I think that the scariest thing would have been if number 45 was still out there because you need to have some basic understanding of how government works. Government does not work, and I don't want to spend too much time on this end, but government doesn't work here like a private company.
No, and you have to be able to trust your top military people. It's as much as everybody wants to go in there and get some action in war, this can turn really ugly really fast.
Yeah, it is. That brings up a point that I wanted to bring up anyways, and that's uh, Putin is very reminiscent of Stalin in the 1930s. Stalin did not trust the people who had been in the military. I think they were worried they were allies of Trotsky and all that. The upper ranks I'm talking about, the colonels and above.
Mhm.
So he purged the officer ranks hugely, and surprisingly enough, through covert ways, helped. Hitler helped. So it was going on with this that Stalin would appoint people who were loyal to him in the upper echelon positions. So when Hitler invaded, it was relatively easy running for a long, long time.
Mhm.
But then people from the Ukraine and places like that, who were going to give up their land so easily, turned into partisans, and they held them up. And then the weather, as it did to Napoleon, messed him up. Well, he's done the same thing. He's purged that. His secretary of his defense minister there had no military experience. I read that today. He's got no military experience whatsoever, and yet he's the one basically directing the policy on that.
They
What?
ha they're very different over there in the way that they do things. One of the experiences that I had, and everybody's heard about the deconfliction line that we had with the Russians in Syria. We monitored what they were doing. They monitored what we were doing. It wasn't coordination because we can't coordinate with them. We can't fight with them, but it was a way to make sure that we didn't accidentally run upon each other. And so we coordinated ISIS strikes so far as to say, I'm striking here, I'm going to be there from this time to this time. You can come later if you want. And we had different lines in the sand of where we went, where they were going to go. You can't pass this, all of that. But the Russian on the other end of that line switched out every few months, however many months it was. And one of the things that they did is the outgoing person didn't tell the incoming person anything. So it was a way to make themselves look better because they have it all figured out. This new person shows up, and you can tell when there's a new person because suddenly everything's wrong and things aren't coordinated smoothly, and it just feels choppy. And we could always tell he must be a new guy, and it would take them a good 2 3 weeks to really get back to where it was with the old guy. But one of those guys told our guy, "Yeah, I just got here and I don't know anything about what I'm supposed to do." And so that's how they operate. It's all about looking better than the next guy. And that sort of system doesn't bode well when you're actually out in the trenches fighting.
Yeah, it doesn't bode well, and that's why I think people are surprised because of such a massive army. I mean, you're talking 150 to 175,000 people on attack. We haven't seen that kind of fighting since World War II.
And they're
And
still not like making any progress.
no, they're not. I mean, one of the things I think that they really expected was Zelensky would capitulate, where the Ukrainians would capitulate, and they'd be able to walk in and do what they wanted to do. And it
Oh,
doesn't work out
here's
that good.
you reminded me of something that I wanted to say. I read this 2 days ago that said that Zelensky had survived a third, assassination attempt, and the reason that he keeps surviving these is because there's people on the inside in Russia that are alerting Ukraine to these teams that are coming in to get him and giving him that information. That also tells me that Putin's on a limited time here. If his own people are making sure that Zelensky's not dying, then there's a lot more going on that Putin is not going to be able to control long term.
Yeah, he's a policeman. That is his background. He's a policeman. He has been allowed to do things that only a policeman, particularly the intelligence policeman that he was, can get away with for so long. People, because, and if we take it one more step in a different direction, and economically, Europe became so dependent on getting fuel, the oil and the gas from them, they tend to look to the other way on so many things. And I think he was shocked, absolutely shocked, that they were willing and are willing and continue to be even more willing, I think, to give up on that, even if it hurts their own economy, to end this because it's limited. I mean, you can't be locked in, not having any foreign trade. Your banks can't trade into the basic systems. You're being penalized. Your ruble has gotten down to nothing. It's worth about less than three-quarter of a cent when it was worth a cent and a half just 2 months ago.
Yeah.
There's no money in the banks in the long run other than what's in the rubles, and that's now becoming worthless on that. I mean, it's like owning a Bitcoin last year when it's like 80, $90,000 a coin, and now it's like $35,000 a coin. All of a sudden, boom, everything that you account on is no longer there. And I don't know why he didn't realize that when he had all these reserves in Europe and America and other places, that we wouldn't have the opportunity to freeze those reserves. So it cut his ability to pay for all this stuff by better than 50%.
And I don't know what he thought the people of Russia were gonna do. Like, over 13, 14,000 people have been out in the streets protesting in Russia. Like,
Mhm.
in the US, you'd be like, "Oh, yeah, whatever." They're not protesting, that's how many have been arrested. You
Yeah.
know, if and he's cut off their access to social media and cut back on their internet so that they aren't able to congregate, and they're still protesting him like that. I don't know that he realized it would be so unpopular in his own country.
Yeah, it's interesting too. I read that the older people are the ones who are supportive of him because they don't know any better, I guess. I don't know because they've been so cloistered and what they can see, what they can hear, and everything else. It's the young people who are seeing it because they're savvy for social media and all this kind of stuff. So they have the ability to know what's truly going on and doing
Yeah.
it. But so many, even Russians within there. I mean, there's three oligarchs who are outside of the country that have criticized this. There's one major one inside of the country that says they should have peace, that they shouldn't be doing
Yeah.
this fight.
And I mean,
And
even
it's
China has come out and said, "Hey, we can help these negotiations. We don't mind the help." And I think they thought China would be behind them.
they would at least, I think, China, of course, is dependent so much on their trade with everybody else too. That Russia, yeah, they're important for energy, but they're not really important for much else on there. Uh, Also, you don't think that Z is looking closely at the failures of the Russian military on this? You don't back the wrong horse. I mean,
Yeah.
Britain was very close to coming in on the side of the South in the Civil War, But when they saw what was happening on there, saying, "Hey, we're not going to do this," France waited until after Saratoga in the Revolution. They want to make sure you back a winner. They're not going to
Right.
get too much involved with this if they can't back the winner.
But I mean, going back to the Revolutionary War, nobody expected the Americans to win that. It's almost the same sort of situation. You don't think of Ukraine as a military powerhouse, but sometimes all you just need is a little bit of heart and a leader that inspires you to fight.
That and ironically, the support of other countries pouring in what you need for supplies, and you're fighting for your home.
Yeah.
Fighting for your home has a lot to do with why they're doing it. I don't know why he could believe, and they had their ethnic relatives. They're like first cousins, Russians and Ukrainians. But I don't know, and the Russian people were able to take a fight for so much in World War II and World War One for that matter until it got ridiculous. Which World War One maybe Putin should look a little bit at too, of what happened with the Russian army. So you had this going on, and it's just he expected that they wouldn't do the same things to defend their homes that the Russians would have done to defend their homes.
I
If it
don't
would have
think
been
the Russians
reversed,
would have done it. I don't
not for
think
Putin.
like no, like the Russians to me just don't seem to be very excited to be Russian. It's almost like they're trapped being Russian, you
Yeah,
know?
and they're really trapped right now being Russian.
Yeah. It's very
Russia,
it
Russia, yeah. You know, when you've got so much of the world, and there were some really strange countries that supported us in the General Assembly on the censuring Russia for what they did. It is an amazing situation. It breaks my heart. In fact, I've got a shirt coming in talking about kilted people support Ukraine. I can't wait to
that's
get that in.
awesome.
I think
So
the end of the week is coming in.
so
But
let me ask you a question. I have a question.
that
As a historian, what are your thoughts? What do you think are the chances that the people of Russia will find a way to overthrow Putin?
well, that is a tough one. In a lot of countries, I would say that what was going on, the military would do it, and that is still a possibility. I think the oligarchs could do it. I think that the Russian people themselves are very tolerant, but then if they see this consistent losing, if we've gone 3 weeks almost, 3 weeks on Thursday. If we go 3 weeks and then go another 3 weeks, and they haven't appreciably changed the direction, that they haven't toned down the war, and you're getting thousands of Russian children being sent back in body bags from being killed, then I think the mothers will do it. And I think when they start getting into the street, you look at the revolution 1905, and then certainly 1917, how they had to change things because that the people said no longer, we're not going to take this any longer. It's not going to be easy. I won't say for sure that they would do it. It's a possibility. Uh, I think the more that they clamp down on them, on what's going on, the harder it's going to be to keep them clamped down. I think
Yeah.
eventually they do it. Um, I think the
Do you
big thing
think
is
there's
being
a do you
paid.
think there's a price high enough for any of his inside people to make it happen?
It's a possibility. It's a possibility, but nobody wants to take that.
Right.
Uh,
Because well, nobody like if it's happening in like dungeons with the Illuminati, like kind of crazy
yeah,
conspiracy theory stuff. But
I wouldn't say that it's impossible that some of those oligarchs who are losing so much want to say, "Hey, we backed the wrong horse here," and could do it. The problem of it is that you can. He's got layers of people around him. You know,
yeah,
he isn't truly a brave man.
no. Well,
He's a
because he
man
knows he's
behind.
not liked.
Yeah, well, he's a man behind the scenes doing these kinds of things,
Yeah.
and he has all this swagger, and yet he's probably extremely insecure now. Right now, he doesn't know. When you're insecure, you don't trust, and you flash out. So he's dangerous. I mean, he's no different. What we need to that viper is we need a big old mongoose. And I think that Zelensky is a mongoose, but he can't get to the throat of that viper. So he has to start cutting off parts of the viper from the back end until the viper is dead. Whether
Yeah,
that's going to be enough or not, I don't know.
I
But
hope so.
even if they win, take the cities, I've read and I truly believe this too, based on it. They're not going to be able to control the country.
No.
They're not going to be able to control the country. They're going to get the same level of insurgency that they've gotten everywhere, that people gotten wherever they go. You just can't control that many. If it's taken 175,000 troops to get 3 weeks in, and you're only on corners of the country, I don't know what to do. I don't know what they're going to do. I
Yeah.
think again, my whole point for wanting to talk about this is my heart going out to these Ukrainians who are fighting for the survival of their country and their survival of their leader. Ironically, here's a man who was a comedian, and he's become a statesman through this. He's become probably one of the most popular leaders in the world. People are just so impressed with what he's been able to do to hold back this juggernaut, this Russian bear.
Hmm.
Uh, and I think we got to get out there. We got to let people know that we support this. I think also one of the things we have not done enough yet is be willing to take some of these refugees into this country. People have families here. There's a lot of Ukrainians that have been here
Hmm.
for generations, and even ethnic Russians that don't want anything to do with that kind of person like Putin. That be willing to support these people coming in. I think we have to look at that so we don't have the approbation we got for not taking care of the Jews during the Holocaust. If there's 2 million people out of refugees, and Poland's gotten half of them, it's time that we spread the wealth of these people and help
Right.
them.
How many other times have we not helped?
Yeah.
Syria and tons of
Well,
times.
back to Syria and that too is look what uh, the former president did to our allies who did the bulk of the fighting against ISIS, those Kurds. He made the deal with another dictator, Erdogan, to allow him to come in and work genocide on those people, which Erdogan's been doing that ever since he's been in there working on to trying to eliminate the threat of the Kurds because they want their own area. They want a Kurdistan. I mean, what can you say? You can't blame them.
Yeah.
But that's it. I mean, do he does he think they can do the same thing in a place like that? I don't believe he can. I really don't.
Nope.
Well, I think we've covered where we feel. I know in the hearts of it. Is there any final thing you want to say about it?
Um, yeah, like I admire their bravery and the strength that the Ukrainians have, but I feel sympathy for Russians, like ordinary Russian citizens that are being held hostage by this crazy dictator that is making their life very difficult and doesn't care about them just as much as he doesn't care about the Ukrainians. So there's a lot of suffering going on in that part of the world right now.
Yes. In addition to that, as a historian, I see the situation from the points like we talked about in American the Revolution, where it was at the Civil War, and particularly for them, the Russo-Japanese War of 1905, when they were defeated by the Japanese fleet, and what that led to a revolution in that time when when the Tsar had to give up a lot of power. And then, of course, the revolution in 1917, 1918, the Red Revolution when we go on there. I think that, he needs to look closely at his back because there's a big, fat target on his back.
And dollar
And
signs.
yeah. And I'm hoping that target, somebody is going to zero in on it one way or the other.
Yeah,
We can do it because the man is nuts. I've had
I
enough
agree.
nuts authoritarian wannabes and authoritarian people in the world now. Well, thank you, Karen. And listeners, you're going to get a chance to see more of us on here in different topics. It's going to be like it was in the past, but you never know what's going to come up. We have fun times. We did a nice Christmas one, and we did some other things in the past. We're going to do some fun things as well as politics in the future. So thank you for listening, and God bless you. God bless our great nation and its legitimately elected leaders of who we know who they are. And God bless and protect our troops, and God and bless and protect Ukraine and its leaders. God, just give them the strength to carry on with the infidel that are trying to attack them. Good night.